Okay, we are 3 weeks and 2 days from the NFL draft. The Cleveland Browns are still sort of in their free agency period. There is some new stuff going on, but I would be remiss if I didn't take advantage of what happened this past Sunday. Bree, who was celebrating her birthday, happy birthday, Bree.
Thank you.
Got a cornucopia of sports that pertain just to her, including one event that she probably doesn't even know about, but was very funny when I saw it happen. That particular event was an XFL game on ESPN, was preempted. Why? Because a pickleball event ran over. It's taking
I think
over.
I did hear about this.
It's taking over.
That's right,
But
as it should.
Among the high-level athletics that took place, featuring women athletes, including a gymnastics competition, the women's national championship occurred, and obviously there was a bunch of fallout over girls, getting in each other's faces or making symbols or whatever. I have been fortunate enough to podcast with several women who love sports, who competed in sports, and yet nothing about sports is more compelling to these women than when athletes have beef. For example, the most exciting element of the Super Bowl for Bree was that the two teams hated each other. Like, that got her going in a way that just few things do. And yet, so you have this whole thing, and the controversy I don't even care about. I'm entirely interested in the point of view of Bree, and I haven't talked to her deliberately about this before this, so I didn't ruin anything. So with that, I yield the floor.
Thank you, Pete. So it was a fantastic birthday weekend. My daughter turned 9 on Saturday, and I turned, I'm not going to say my age, but you guys can all figure it out if you'd like. So my weekend was spent mostly being ignored by the other birthdays in my family, which I would not have it any other way. And it was also spent at a gymnastics tournament, or I guess meet, on Sunday afternoon, which also coincided with this championship game that you were alluding to. And so my mom actually attended the meet with me, and we snuck out in between events to watch the game on her phone. And so first, I just want to backtrack a little bit. As a former athlete, former basketball player specifically,
basketball legend.
Okay, stop. No. Went to a very small school. I will just say basketball was my love. That's my true love sport, particularly playing it, but I love watching it too. I have to say, I was so happy to see women's basketball specifically get the love and attention that it deserves. And it has felt like women's basketball has not really gotten the spotlight. I know that the WNBA has been, there's been a lot of marketing efforts behind it. There's been a lot of, like, a big push, a lot of, celebrities, NBA players supporting women's professional basketball. But it didn't seem to get the same limelight that obviously the men's NBA gets. And one could argue the same happens at the college level. Obviously the men's NCAA tournament gets, a ton of hype. There's the betting side of it, the bracket challenges, etc. I loved what happened with women's and the phenomenon that is Caitlin Clark specifically, and the way that she plays the game, the way that she shoots the ball. I mean, she is literally like a little Steph Curry with, like, her quick release. She's an amazing passer. She sees the floor really well. I mean, it's exciting to watch, and Iowa plays a very balanced game. It's not like she is specifically dominating on the court, although she's able to do that. Like, she gets her teammates involved. And then you had LSU, the whole storyline, Angel Reese, and I feel like the coach had gotten a lot of attention throughout this year with her outfits and how she acts. I mean, I remember, like, just seeing press conferences, like, show up on my timeline, and I'm like, what is happening right now? So I was very excited for this game to be played. I was upset in the sense that it was buried on a Sunday afternoon, like early afternoon, but it got 10 million viewers, which was amazing to see. And so my mom and I were tuning in in and out here watching the game. And I remember when LSU went up, I was like, there's no way I was going to come back. Like, I just don't see them coming back from a 13-point deficit. I think there was 4 minutes left in the game or something. And my mom had looked at me and she was like, oh no. And I was like, what? And she was like, Angel Reese did the can't see me taunt and pointed to her ring, like her finger for the ring. And I didn't even have to watch the video. I didn't even have to log on to the internet. I said to my mom, I was like, oh no. I was like, this is not going to go over well. Sure enough, get back from the competition that night. I'm scrolling through Twitter. And at this point, it's 9:00. The game's been over for quite some time at that point. You know, you would have thought the dust had settled. But I believe what was trending was Angel Reese, obviously. Caitlin Clark taunting, I think, was trending.
Classless was the big one that was.
Which one?
Classless was the big one that.
Classless. Thank you. And so I immediately started clicking on, and I was getting angrier and angrier by the minute, by the thread. You already alluded to this, Pete. I love this aspect of competitive sports. I don't care like what level it's being played. I feel like for me, like the fact that it was called Classless was because it was women being involved in the whole thing. Like there
are multiple levels of this that are
yes,
great.
There's a lot of layers that you could unpack here. A lot of different.
It was not a good look for
exactly
for sports in general.
Agreed. I feel like though women are supposed like we are taught to be ladylike and to be polite and come off in this way that essentially caters to men in this country, in this society. Like I will never forget, Pete, like not in sports specifically, but I had a boss once say to me, I was going into a big meeting, and it was with a different partner, and she looked at me and this was coming from a woman. She literally said to me, she was like, oh, just use your charm to get what you want. And I was like, you would never in a million years say that to my male counterpart. Like never would that be something to come out of your mouth to get something in the business world by using your charm. I mean, could you imagine anyone saying that to you as a man?
It would be an interesting way to go if that happened. That's all I would say. But it's, that's so what makes this infuriating.
Yeah, my point is women are groomed in a way to act this way, to act a certain way, to be polite, to have class and all of this stuff. And so I was going through and I'm like, no, like I love this. Like these are two competitors playing at the highest level, regardless of who it was doing the taunting. And the fact that it was called taunting, I was like, oh, okay. Like it wasn't face to face. They weren't inches away from each other. She wasn't screaming at her. She didn't spit on her. Like there was nothing physical or aggressive in a nature. It was truly just an emotional response to Angel Reese and her team winning the national championship, coming off of all of this hype surrounding Caitlin Clark and her taunting that she did, the weekend prior. Like she was doing it back to her. I mean, I love that. Like, give me more of it. In fact, like, I cannot wait until women's basketball kicks off next year. Like, give me a rematch of all of this. Give me them in the Final Four, in the finals again. Like, I want all the smoke from both of them. Well,
but let's be honest. Like, for all this, they're phenomenal players. There's no question. But part of the reason people were tuning in is because they are two people with like character and edge.
Yes.
They're just like part of watching them is this because you think this type of thing might happen. Like they are both. And I love the fact that Angel Reese has been like completely unapologetic about anything.
Agreed. Same. Good for her.
But like, that's what makes it compelling. Like, that's what makes this fun. I would venture to say that the ratings were doubled because of who these women are as athletes. So from my perspective, and as I thought about this, watching this on Sunday, my thought was just in what has changed in, the years since, you were playing and other women I know, like Nicole or Abby or any of them, how much different would it be for you to play now as it would compared to playing then. And I think because they are, in some ways breaking down some barriers in terms of
Yes,
what is allowed to happen. Like, you're allowed to be exuberant, you're allowed to be fun, you're allowed to sort of express yourself in a way. And the double standard here is that, men's sports are celebrated. And to bring this back to football, nothing has been more fun in years and years and years of Cleveland Browns football than when the Browns were good and Baker Mayfield was cocky. Like,
exactly.
And and I've seen this comparison made that, like, Angel Reese was doing something Baker Mayfield would do. And there were people who hated Baker Mayfield for it, and there were people who loved Baker Mayfield for it. Either way, they were watching to see Baker Mayfield, either, rooting against him, wanting to fail miserably.
Love or hate him.
Well, yes, like, he became a compelling figure. And what do most people think Baker Mayfield will be great at whenever he's done playing football?
Media.
Yes. Yeah. Shannon Sharp was
opinions. Yeah.
Yeah. But even as a player, like, he's got all those famous clips of, like, him calling him doing the phone call, the National Guard or whatever, that, talking during a Broncos game, like those NFL Films clips. Any number of memes out there are male athletes doing something to another male athlete, and it's, like, celebrated. So
yeah, exactly. It's like they have moxie and swag, and
the language is completely different.
The language is completely different, and describing the male athlete versus women playing sports, showing any type of emotion at all. Like, it's typically deemed negative.
So I love it that Angel Reese is unapologetic, and I love the fact that Caitlin Clark is sort of like, yeah, this is how it goes, and this is
she's defending her. I mean, that's the other thing that I don't think people understand. Like, this wasn't a pickup game. Like, these women, they put in the same amount of time and energy in training and practicing and competing as their male counterparts. Mm-hmm. Like, we are so trained in that women just are less than in everything that we do. Like, that is what has been ingrained in society for the most part. And so the thinking is, well, like, nobody cares about women's sports, right? Like that. I mean, that, like,
that has been a thing through this tournament, and thankfully, should, it won't, but it should firmly put an end to that crap.
Agreed. I mean, Pete, 2 years ago, we are 2 years removed from those videos and pictures going viral of the women's weight room at the NCAA women's basketball tournament versus the men's. I mean, like, that was 2 years ago, everyone. Like, one would think now, and this is why we talked about this months ago, but this is why I'm happy to see the NIL play a factor, 100%. Because these girls now will get paid for their likeness and their popularity. Because, like, I guarantee, like, Caitlin Clark probably can't get shirts and whatever out fast enough. And same with Angel Reese at this point.
Right. And, where the WNBA is at, college is still more marketable for women.
Yes.
UConn, Tennessee, South Carolina, these are huge brands if you go to these schools, and LSU now, these are huge marketing opportunities. Or Iowa, like, they sell out they sell out their arenas in a way that the WNBA's obviously grown quite a bit, but it's just not quite there yet. So they've got to make the money when they can, and college is the best time to them to do it. So I agree with you 100%. And yeah, that's absolutely why I wanted to talk about this.
For the record, I was a feisty player. I was. And I had a couple of teams.
Shocking. And you know what really surprises me? The clips I get of her children that are also feisty.
The same way. Oh, gosh. Yeah, I know. And here's the thing. So is my mom. Like, you should see my mom playing pickleball. Like, I'm going to call you out, Mom. I know that you listen. Like, my mom, I'll be on the other court playing. I will hear her dropping lots of swear words. She's thrown her paddle. We played in a tournament together, and my mom and this other lady got into it about my dad was on the sideline telling us something, and you're not allowed to have anyone coach you during a tournament. And so we were going back and forth. This lady telling, I mean, Pete, like, you got to come watch our pickleball tournaments if you want to see feisty.
I would.
My late 60-year-old mother has thrown her paddle multiple times. So I have to calm her down.
Now, and the last thing on this, and again, it gets back to the NFL, but it carries over to the NBA and everything else. one of the biggest complaints fans have is that after these games, players go and hug it out, that they're buddy, that there's no real rivalry. Women's basketball has all the rivalry you could ask for. They do not like each other, at least in terms of being on the court. And that's what makes it fun. Anyway, I couldn't resist that because I knew what I was going to get and it was worth it.
Hey, we're recording That's What B Said this week too, Pete. And me and Brittany have already dedicated a segment on this. So if you want to tune into that, we're going to like rank our favorite taunting moments in sports history. So that's how much I enjoy this whole situation.
So unfortunately, we received news today that while training in Texas with Deshaun Watson, Michael Woods, the second has ruptured his Achilles tendon. The team confirmed, he's from Texas. So I assume that's why they were down there. Deshaun Watson obviously has a home down there. They're working out, and Michael Woods is a guy who had a productive rookie year in terms of sort of showing enough to be interesting that I thought going in, he had a pretty good shot to make this team. And was trying to do everything he could to put himself in the best possible position to make sure that happened this year, given the fact that the Browns have traded for Elijah Moore. They've at least theoretically added Marquise Goodwin. We'll get to that too. That he wanted to put himself in the best position. And unfortunately, this is a risk with that. It's a bad situation for him. I guess in some ways you could say if it was going to happen, it's better that it happens in April, that it gives him the time to potentially fully recover in time to compete for a spot on the team next year, that he's not potentially like playing hurt and trying to make the team next year, that it could potentially short circuit his career. So hopefully he is able to make a full recovery, but it just it doesn't change necessarily what the Browns were going to do, because in the draft or whatever, they've made it pretty clear they're going to take whatever they think the best player available is. But and I wrote about this today. I think it makes that conversation about what they might do a little more real. It feels a little bit more like a thing, as opposed to before it was sort of like, okay, yeah, they've got a million wide receivers, 14, maybe they'll draft another one, whatever. But for whatever reason, this injury sort of hits home that becomes a larger likelihood.
I was really sad to hear this report. I was a big fan of him last year. It's players like when you texted me this, Pete, I responded with, well, good thing they have 13 other wide receivers at this point on the team. I'm sad for him because he seemed very promising even last year. And then he was dealing with injury, right? Within training camp, or like right at the end of training camp. He
apparently looked good early in camp, then suffered a hamstring, and that sort of set him back.
Yes. And then now obviously this injury and situation with training outside of team practices. I think as fans, we love to see players getting together and training together and building chemistry and whatnot. This is where I think it gets to be obviously a tricky situation, because this isn't formal, right? There's no formal workouts right now. They're not at the facilities. Like, they don't have the same access that they typically have. Now, we're lucky this wasn't a deemed starter or someone that obviously was projected to be a starter. So it's unfortunate. But again, I don't know how much of an impact this will have. But I was bummed to see this, because I was rooting for him to make the team again or have some sort of a small role on this team and roster.
Yeah, I mean, he does some things that are interesting. He's strong. He's able to create a little bit of space down the field, which helps him get separation and make plays on the ball. And he contributed on special teams, which I think is going to be a factor. Marquise Goodwin, who we're like a week and a half since he agreed to the contract, but hasn't come and signed it yet, which I don't know.
He's still not signed.
Yeah, I don't know if we're at the point where this becomes an issue yet, but I do wonder when it becomes an issue. And who knows? Maybe he's in out of the country and doing something.
Nobody has a tracker. We haven't done that yet.
Yeah, I we really need to get out of the following plane business. Who knows? But he could be in doing community work and could be part of Water Boys or something in Africa, or just on a family vacation or whatever. You never know. But it's just, it's one of those things where theoretically he could decide, I'm not going to do this, and goes elsewhere. I have no reason to think that yet, but it's just sort of something that sits out there. But if he does sign, and he's not guaranteed anything necessarily in terms of a roster spot, but Amari Cooper doesn't play special teams. Donovan Peoples-Jones returns punt, but doesn't play special teams. David Bell does, and then Elijah Moore doesn't. So, those four, Cooper, DPJ, Bell, and Moore, are pretty much locks. If Goodwin's makes the team, that sixth guy is probably going to have to do a lot of heavy lifting in terms of special teams, and that could open some things up. Like Jalen Darden's got some experience on special teams. There are people who are currently trying to dump dirt on Anthony Schwartz. He's just walking around, and people are throwing dirt at him to try to bury him. But he's got a ton of experience on special teams, so that sort of potentially opens the door for him. Jakeem Grant coming back, and if you haven't, check out the interview Noah Weiskopf did for us. It's really good. The stuff about David Njoku in there is really interesting in terms of him taking on a leadership role and what he tried to do to sort of help him through that injury process. So I mean, it just opens up an opportunity, and then obviously the draft is still a factor. If they like a wide receiver, they're not going to hesitate. So it's just one more thing that sort of, again, it doesn't really change much. They could have done, they could have done all these, gone to the draft and picked a wide receiver if Woods was here, but it just changes that a little bit more and makes it sort of feel like, okay, there's more of a path for somebody else to make the team in a way that maybe there wasn't before. Just before we got on here, there was a player that was a lot of former Seahawks related to the Browns. There was a player who was on a tender, Ryan Neal, a safety who played for the Seahawks, and the Seahawks have gotten themselves into some weird financial issues. Suddenly this guy was available, and the Browns still have to address, one, they need depth at safety, but two, they also need a pure slot defender, and Ryan Neal was somebody who could potentially do that. He has a lot of experience playing around the box, but reports came out pretty quickly that the Browns weren't interested at this point, which to me signaled he's probably getting more money than people realize. He signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for a 1-year deal. I'll be curious to see what the money was for that, but I expect he's going to be able to play there quite a bit, which would make the Browns less attractive. But nevertheless, and I wrote about this, but it's been a theme throughout the offseason for all the things the Browns can do through free agency and everything else. That's the one position they really don't have a good way to address until the draft. And if they do it there, obviously last year, Greg Newsome as a slot corner wasn't exactly thrilled about it. But they also need a bigger body to do it too. I mean, we had the last of Ronnie Harrison, the best, we had Troy Hill for a year. The best guy who to do it so far, at least under Joe Woods, was MJ Stewart, who was great for half a year and then signed with the Texans and doesn't seem to play there, which is sort of a bummer. But to me, I think they're ultimately going to have to get two guys to fill out that role. That's sort of what that role has become in the NFL. You want a safety body to be able to play bigger, match up with tight ends. Obviously, the Browns play two teams with really good tight ends just in the division. But you also want a corner who can match up and deal with some of those things. And it's possible that the Browns say basically it's third and really long or whatever, super obvious passing situation. Greg Newsome is going to be the best option to put out there to get our best 11 on the field. And at that point, he's not worried about stopping the run, which he didn't do. That maybe it's a little bit better, but I do think, one, the corner class is really good this year. So I think they're going to want to take one anyway. So if they're going to take one, and if they get one with sort of the versatility to play inside or outside, that could really balance out that room quite a bit. And then, like I said, safety, if they can find somebody just to play that role, give them some depth behind Grant Delpit, all those things, that would be super helpful in rounding out this roster.
Yeah, it's been pretty quiet on the front lately, right? For the last couple of weeks. It was like a lot of action the first couple of weeks, and now it's been silent.
Well, you've had some of these players come out and like complain about there is always a little bit of a lull at this point anyway, but you also have this added element of players are basically coming out complaining about the market, including players who have signed. Like Juan Thornhill's been pretty open about saying that the market has not been great for players, even though he did reasonably well in it. But you get to this point where, teams have made their offers. Players are either taking them or they're not. There's nothing necessarily putting a stress on either party to sort of change their offer. So unless the player just decides, hey, we want to do this, there's not a whole lot of reason for that to change, except if they feel like the draft is going to sort of take away jobs potentially. Like if teams drafting players may potentially keep them out of a job, then there's a little bit more pressure to go ahead and take a deal. But it's particularly with players on the defensive line, which is obviously where the Browns are still trying to do some things. Most of the rookies that are going to come in aren't ready to play anyway, so it doesn't affect them at all. Defensive tackle in particular is such a difficult transition from college that takes 2 and 3 years to figure it out. So the Browns had Al Woods come, or either have had or are going to have Al Woods, a veteran from the Seattle Seahawks. Big boy defensive tackle. He's 330 pounds, would provide some depth inside along with Dalvin Tomlinson. He's coming in for a visit. He's also visiting the Jets. But, unless the deal he wants is there, he may just go ahead and sit back and wait until June. And obviously the perfect example of us seeing this happen was Jadeveon Clowney.
Yeah.
Without some of these guys, and Al Woods could certainly be in this camp, being he's in his 30s, he's that big, may not be thrilled at the idea of going to mini camp or off-season team activities. And may just be like, one, I'm old enough, I know how to keep myself in shape, I will come in and be ready, but I'm not going to do it until training camp because I don't want to get myself injured or whatever. And then just seeing if that stress makes teams be a little bit more willing to pony it up. If whether it's the Browns or somebody else goes through the draft and they didn't get what they needed, it may put a little more pressure on them to sort of offer just a little bit more, maybe more guaranteed or whatever it is to get that deal done. So, as we sit here now, not a whole lot of pressure. Maybe we see a little bit of movement, in the next week or few. But yeah, it's one of those things like deadline. We always talk about this in terms of sports or most anything. Deadlines make deals, and there's no apparent deadline for anybody.
Yeah. And the draft honestly feels like it's still so far away. I know it's at the end of the month, but like to me, and I know you're closer to all of it, but I feel like based on the Browns trading, what's the right term? They traded up, down. I always get very confused.
They traded down okay. So they had pick 42 and they traded down because they are now at pick 74.
I know. I always think of that backwards though, because like trading down, I feel like you go to a lower number.
Yeah, no, it's weird because you're like they traded down and you went from a second round pick to a third round pick and you're thinking no, they went up because it's a higher number.
I know. I can talk myself into both ways. So I wanted to make sure I spoke correctly. So the fact that they are now not drafting until the third round. Which I will actually be out of town that weekend and traveling the week leading up to the draft for work. I feel like this is great because I don't have to care as much. I don't have to pay attention because pretty much like the Browns are going to be stagnant for the first day and a half, right? 2 days?
No, day and a half's right. The
day and a half.
First round has its own night and then rounds 2 and 3. The thing the Browns are trying to do, and they try to do this every year, is last year was a little different because we didn't know they were going to trade down to round 3 until it happened.
Yeah.
But they want to put themselves, Andrew Berry's open, very upfront about this. He wants to address all the needs before he gets there. And then he can just pick players that he really likes.
Which I like. It feels like, especially at the position that they're in right now. And I know that can change. Like things can happen where their pick number changes altogether, but I like that because then it feels like there's not a ton of pressure on making sure you get the right guy. And like, I'd rather be in the position of, let's let the player come to us.
There's a number of things that are beneficial in that, especially given where the Browns are picking. One, they can just let players fall to them. And this is what happened
Right.
last year when they got Martin Emerson. There were like anonymous scouts from other teams who were like, "Oh crap, they got a really good player here," and they didn't have to work for it. It just sort of worked out.
Just happened.
It also, and here again, Emerson's the exception. You don't want those guys to have to play as a rookie. You want them to, if they earn it, so be it. But you want to be in a position where the draft is bonus. The draft is adding more help for the future. It's not, well, we got to get this guy
on it.
Yes. And, last year, different. Beyond Emerson, they also picked a kicker. So, like, those guys have immediate pressure to produce right away. But, Alex Wright played a ton of football, was not ready. David Bell was better than people think he was, even though he didn't have a ton of production. But, like, now when you look at it through that lens, you're sort of more excited about a guy like David Bell heading into year 2 because you're sort of like, now I get to see what he can really do, even though he actually played 44% of offensive snaps last year, which is crazy to me. You just don't think about it because of how little he got the ball. But the advanced data on that, the metrics for him are really positive in terms of actually getting opening. It's just a matter of Jacoby Brissett. God bless him. He had his guys and guys he trusted. They were getting the ball, and guys it got better at the end of sort of when, the end of Jacoby's run. David Bell started seeing the ball more, but that's sort of what it was for him. DPJ, it took him a minute for Brissett to sort of even trust him. He would, always go to Cooper. But now you have those guys coming back in year 2, and you're sort of like, okay, now I want to really see what they can do. This is what functional organizations look like. It's been a long road to get here. I'm not displeased to see the day to be past the days where people are wondering why 3rd round and 4th round rookies aren't on the field now, and they must be busts because they're not ready right out of the gate, and you get to develop them. And especially like the Steelers in the 90s and 2000s and 2010s even would have guys they draft and you wouldn't see them for a couple of years, and then they were really good, and you're just like, so it we'll see if any of those guys produce the way they want to. But now, being in the position they're in, and hopefully they can continue to knock out some of these needs or feel good about addressing some of these holes, that they can then say, we just want the best football players. And obviously they've got a little bit of a tint on how they do it. They're going to, they've got premium positions that they sort of put ahead of everything else. Emerson at corner was certainly an example of that, which is why it was sort of surprising to people when they picked him. No one was sitting there going, "Oh, we're going to take a corner with the first pick." But, defensive end, corner, receiver, obviously quarterback, even though the Browns aren't necessarily in the market for one, but there is news on that front too. Those positions that just are always going to have a much higher value, offensive line, are always going to be a little bit higher on their sort of value and may push a player over another one at a lesser position because that's how they want to operate. But yes, this is where you want to be. Take players because you want them, not because you need them.
Right. I agree. And also just help fill in the depth. More depth, Pete. More
Indeed.
depth.
Well, yeah, there's a couple positions where it's interesting to see how that's going to work, which is interesting because one of the things I've noticed this week, and this is carried over from last week, is the varying range of opinions on where the Browns are. And obviously most of those opinions revolve entirely around Deshaun Watson. Someone on this podcast may have suggested he was broken.
I'm just trying to stay level, staying at my level,
sure.
Even.
But like Mina Kimes was like sort of surprised on a podcast or stuff. It's like, wow, this team's pretty good. They've got a lot of things. I really like this offense. And like went as far as saying Deshaun Watson couldn't have asked for a better situation. I like to hear that.
Okay, that's wild. Calm down, everyone. Calm down.
But then you have things like Pro Football Focus where they're sort of like, I think they ranked the Browns at like 21 or something heading into the draft. And a lot of that is Watson has to go and prove it. I don't have a problem with either standpoint. They're both right. And that's what sort of makes that interesting. Last thing that came up is like quarterback news. The Browns are having, I think today, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, UCLA quarterback, coming in for a visit. He's somebody they've talked to. He's played a ton of football at UCLA. I think he's over at 50 starts. He was there 5 years. Chip Kelly's offense, which is interesting because the Browns hired Bill Musgrave, who among the things he's done in his career was with Chip Kelly when he was with the Eagles, was specifically mentioned when Kevin Stefanski talked about Bill Musgrave, the fact that he was with Chip Kelly. So if that's sort of more the offense that they want to run, it would certainly make sense for them to target a quarterback if they want to draft one, like Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who's been playing in that type of offense. The thing with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and I've thought this for a while. I've been hearing more of this lately. I think Dorian Thompson-Robinson DTR is going to go way higher than people think he is. Because if you're the Browns, and who knows, they could surprise me and they could take him in round 3 and be like, yeah, we really like him and we want him. But I think he's going to go round 3 or round 4. Because if you're not taking one of those top guys, DTR is like, he's got a great arm. He's played a ton of football. He's played an offense that can translate to the NFL, and he's gotten better every year. Like if you're taking a shot on a guy without paying that like super premium trade, first round pick or trading up and all those things, like he's the perfect shot guy to do that. Now, the caveat to that is Deshaun Watson's not going anywhere.
Right.
So it's like, if you're taking him, you're doing it with the understanding he's not playing for a while. Obviously they re-signed Josh Dobbs, which is awesome. I loved what I heard from Josh Dobbs talking about why he came back and all the things he was happy about to come back, including the Cleveland Science Center. And they've still got Keelan Mond. So my theory with this, and we'll see, I think the Browns are talking to Dorian Thompson-Robinson in part because they're waiting for the team who drafts him to screw it up, get rid of him, and then they're going to grab him. And that is part of that process. Obviously more common in college than the NFL, where, schools that aren't like quite the top schools absolutely plan around what happens if this kid fails at that other school and needs to go somewhere else, that then they can potentially pounce. So
I like it. The Browns are essentially in a relationship but still dating.
Right. So yeah,
smart Pete.
I like Dorian Thompson-Robinson. In my personal view, I would love them to get an undrafted quarterback if they want to bring in a camp arm. The kid I like is Malik. What's his face? Malik out of Louisville. He was a sensational athlete. He's just small. He's like short a little bit, and he's just light. But he's electric.
Been there, done that, Pete.
He's just electric. But if he's undrafted, I don't care. And with the idea that you're going to ultimately sneak him out of the practice squad. I think the Browns are pretty satisfied with their quarterback situation. Maybe, it's possible that they let Mond go. I don't foresee a situation where the Browns are going to keep 3 this year, but you never know. I think it's more, they're going to hope that Keelan Mond can get to the practice squad and keep him that way. But it's certainly something to keep an eye on. But yeah, like I said, I think DTR is going to go higher than people think. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up going higher than Hendon Hooker. The kid out of Tennessee who's talented but old and coming off an ACL and played in what most people are terming a gimmicky offense. So it's certainly something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Listen, everything that you just said makes perfect sense. But for the casual fan, which is a lot of us, can you imagine like the sheer panic of the Browns like drafting a quarterback and the reaction of all of the positions of need and all of this stuff, and just not having the foresight to think about things like that? Like, this is where I feel like the draft like really does. It's hard for a lot of the casual fans to like really get into and follow, because a lot of this isn't necessarily like the right now type of thing. It's a lot of future planning or just strategy.
Well, that's where not having that first round pick and that second round pick adds a little bit of pressure, because if you have those and you're like, oh man, we got this great defensive end, we got a wide receiver, and then you take a quarterback that first pick in the 3rd round, it doesn't feel so bad. Whereas if they come out 74th pick and they go, yeah, we're taking a quarterback, it's going to feel,
and it's their first one.
It's going to feel like a punch in the stomach for a lot of people. So
I'm not trying to offend anyone either, because like I fall into this category. So it just, if you listen to us, stay calm, everyone. Stay calm.
yeah, look, I mean, I'm trying to be as open-minded as possible. I think there's just a ton of different directions they can go. And that's the nature of the beast when you start and you're picking 74th. You don't get to have a whole lot of expectations about what they're going to do at the position. And, you know, I can talk a lot of shit about what I'd like them to do. Ultimately, when it gets down to the pick and they're on the clock, I go from they have to take this guy to please take somebody good. That's it. And that's ultimately what it is. So, you know, whatever position they take somebody good and we'll figure it out. Anyway, shorter episode this week. We'll be back next week. Obviously, we got to ramp up a little bit towards the draft and some other things. So we'll get to some of that stuff. But yeah, just this was a fun episode to do because I couldn't resist getting Bree fired up about that stuff.
Okay.
Do us a favor. You know, you can like, subscribe, all those things. People keep subscribing to YouTube, which is certainly helpful. We appreciate it. And yeah, we'll be back next week.